Arizona is home to 22 tribal nations and more than 340,000 Native Americans. Arizona State University builds on more than 6 decades of working and partnering with tribal nations and communities. Many of our Native faculty incorporate Indigenous knowledge systems in seeking solutions through a process of community engagement that respects and honors traditional ways of thinking. Together, we are creating community solutions leading to a more equitable future.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Tawahungva. Here are the headlines from Indian Country Today. A bill in Arizona will help improve the process to report cases of missing children. Governor Doug Ducey signed House Bill 2098, which says law enforcement must submit a report into state and national databases within 2 hours of receiving a report of a missing child. It also allows tribal police access to this information. This makes it easier for cross-jurisdiction collaboration to quickly respond to missing children cases and spread the word. State Representative Jennifer Germain proposed the bill. She says all the law enforcement agencies needed to get on the same page.
And one thing that we found is that across our different municipalities and different jurisdictions, we did not have a single procedure or protocol for how to address missing children. And it was all over the board on how our law enforcement agencies were responding. And we have 22 tribal nations in Arizona, and having those tribal nations be our partners and have jurisdiction and ability to help in searches for missing children.
The law will go into effect 90 days after the legislative session ends. In South America, mass protests in Colombia continue to grow. Many indigenous communities have been on the front lines as the economic and political tensions rise. Karina Dominguez has more.
Colombians continue anti-government protests despite dozens being killed this past month. Protests erupted across the country and have been most intense in the western region, in a city called Cali. People took to the streets in opposition of a planned tax reform bill, but since then, it's swelled into a mass movement that seeks to address a wide range of issues. In April, Colombian President Ivan Duque Marquez touted the tax reform as a way to address the country's deficit, which tripled during the pandemic. The proposed tax increase would affect anyone making more than $656 a month. Indigenous leaders say their rights are being attacked. In this government, we've had the greatest violations of our rights, every Colombian. Rights granted in the Constitution have been tinkered. This is what we're protesting and why we are demonstrating in the streets without violence. The president withdrew the tax reform proposal amid protests, but the militarized police response aggravated demonstrators, sparking even more protests. The acts of violence aren't committed by us, the well-to-do people, the workers, the indigenous people. There's simply a need at a point when people get tired and need to react in some way. Demonstrators in Cali blocked major roads into the city, crippling the economy. On Tuesday, thousands marched urging protesters and the Colombian government to speed up negotiations and end the blockades. In Phoenix, Karina Dominguez, Indian Country Today.
Indipaz, a human rights and peace-building organization in Bogota, Colombia, says more than 250 indigenous leaders have been killed since 2016, nearly half during the current president's time in office. And Miriam Jimeneo, an anthropologist, told El Pai News the protests have exposed issues that Colombia's indigenous people face every day. More than 300,000 indigenous people live near Cali, the place of the most heated demonstrations. The National Hockey League is dealing with the racist actions of some fans. During the NHL playoffs, racist comments were sent to an Edmonton Oilers player who is First Nations. 23-year-old defenseman Ethan Bear is from the Ochapowas Nation in southern Saskatchewan. After a tough loss, Bear's girlfriend, Lenicia Ned, says he received racist messages on social media directed towards his Indigenous background. The hockey player released a statement in a 2-minute video posted to social media. He says he's ready to stand up against the racist comments.
As you've known, I've been subject to racist behavior on social media, and I know this doesn't represent all Oilers fans or hockey fans, and I greatly appreciate your support and your love during this time. I'm here to stand up to this behavior, to these comments. I'm proud of where I come from. I'm proud to be from Ochapowas First Nation.
The Edmonton Oilers also released a statement saying it is equally disappointed in the racist remarks and that there is more work to do to end racism. According to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, 2 million women are living veterans, and now they're being featured in a campaign by the Center for Women Veterans. It's called I Am Not Invisible and aims to increase awareness about women veterans. Take a look at these photos of more than 3,100 veterans who participated. Photographers came together to shoot portraits of women veterans in 50 states, 74 cities, and almost 30 Indian nations and tribes. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Thawahungva. Coming up, secret spaces bring inspiration and controversy.
And an Ojibwe family shares their Memorial Day quest when we come back.
This is Indian Country Today.
Leo Sanchi Manyavu, I'm Karina Dominguez. Mark Trahan is away. One of the interesting byproducts of the pandemic is that a record number of Americans paid down or paid off their credit card debt. Attorney and financial consultant Patrice Kunish breaks it down.
The credit card companies will work with banks, look at the depository accounts history over time. Are they paying on time? Do they have overdrafts? So the amazing thing is that we're revolutionizing, reforming the credit card industry, which is really important to expand the concept of credit worthiness. And the problem or the implications for Indian country is that a healthy percentage, 18% of Native Americans are unbanked. So they still may be a population that won't have access to this new offer. The other concern, of course, is that the historical lack of credit in Indian country. There really are no banks. We've been victims of predatory lending, cash checking, gouges, discrimination and redlining. We haven't been able to buy houses with mortgages and cars and just deal with typical emergency funds. So while this expansion of credit worthiness using non-traditional underwriting or more lenient credit review, we also want to make sure that we make good decisions, and this is a good cultural fit. You know, we want to be good financial citizens. We learned this post-Cobell. We had a real big experience on the Blackfeet Reservation with Piikani money, you know, this sudden money. So being good financial citizens, we want to have good credit cards with reasonable rates, reasonable limits, and we want to couple that with counseling and financial education. I think one of the most terrific stories in all of this is that Native CDFIs and other Native American financial institutions like credit unions and Native-owned banks are really helping Native Americans and Alaska Natives transition from being unbanked to some traditional banking services. And the way they do that is really not selling loan products or credit services or what have you. They really are focused on the individual and what makes that person credit worthy. We have a lot of farmers and ranchers in Indian country, a lot of seasonal workers, for example, in Alaska with the fisheries. That seasonal income is not going to show in a traditional credit worthiness score. So this has really opened up tremendous opportunities for more access to credit and very necessary credit. And I want to mention the very, very valuable importance of having a relationship with a bank. You know, during the pandemic, we saw a lot of assistance being directly deposited almost automatically into bank accounts, right? We had the stimulus checks, we had the unemployment benefits. And it's a way to get the tax returns to the taxpayer very quickly. We get food vouchers, you know, food stamps, you know, directly deposited. So we want to normalize things for Native Americans, undoubtedly, but we also want to avoid the predatory lenders, those that are really gouging Indian country, that are taking the 20-25% off of each check, you know, individual check. Uh, the other importance of this is that the American Rescue Plan anticipates child tax credit. Now, this is an incredibly important part of getting out of poverty and supporting families. Well, these benefits are going to be deposited into bank accounts. So it's incredibly important, again, that we have a relationship with a bank and avoid you know, the paper checks, presenting them at a cash checker. They take their percentage, and again, we're left with less. So it's not just avoiding the bad, it's moving toward something really good and beneficial for all of us.
That was Patrice Kunish, financial consultant. To Native Hawaiians, Mauna Kea is sacred. It's a very special place. Scientists agree, but they want to see the 30-meter telescope built there. Before the pandemic, up to 30,000 people camped and protested against its construction. The Hawaiian State Legislature has established a working group to discuss how the site will be managed. 3 of its members are leading the protest movement. House Speaker Scott Saiki joins us to talk about this House resolution.
Sure. So, you know, the astronomy issue dates back to the 1960s when the governor at that time worked with the community on the Big Island, the island of Hawaii, to create an astronomy program. And as a part of that, the state of Hawaii issued a master lease to the University of Hawaii for the university to manage Mauna Kea, including the summit of Mauna Kea, where you now have 13 telescopes that have been built there. So over the years since 1968, you know, there has been more concern about the management of Mauna Kea. The lease is a 65-year lease, so it is set to expire in the year 2033. And at that point, the state will have to make a decision on whether or not to continue the lease, the master lease, with the University of Hawaii, or find another way of managing Mauna Kea. About a year prior to the pandemic, about a year and a half ago, the Department of Land and Natural Resources, which manages public land in the state of Hawaii, brought on a consultant to do an evaluation of Mauna Kea and how it's being managed. And the consultant held scoping meetings throughout the state for almost a year, and then produced a report in December 2020. And basically, the consultant made 2 findings. One was that the university had somewhat improved its management ability over Mauna Kea, but the second finding was even more important, which was that the university had failed to manage cultural resources, education on Mauna Kea. And it was the second finding, of the university's inability to manage culture that caused the House of Representatives to adopt a resolution that creates a working group. And the purpose of this working group is to form a 15-member committee that will work over this summer and this fall and propose a new management and governance structure for Mauna Kea. With an issue like this, you just have polar extremes within the community. So that is something that we know that we will be facing. But the purpose of this committee was to bring together diverse groups that would, you know, work to forge some consensus on how to better manage Mauna Kea. So, you know, seven of the 15 seats on our working group were reserved for Native Hawaiian individuals, and so 3 of those seats were actually were given to 3 of the leaders from the Kia'i community on the Big Island. The Kia'i group is the group that took the lead in organizing protests at Mauna Kea over the last few years. But 3 of its leaders, its top leaders, are on our working group.
Psyche talked about the international interest in Mauna Kea.
International community, and the 30-meter telescope proposal is an international project. There's a number of other nations that are involved in that project, and everyone is watching this. But I think part of the reason why is because some of these nations themselves are facing similar issues, within their countries. Canada, for example, is facing similar kinds of concerns and protests, and so I think that this really, the way that we handle the Mauna Kea issue, the way that we manage it, I think could create an international model for how to try to resolve these kinds of cultural differences. So I think that over the past few years, the astronomers and the scientists who are involved with the astronomy program in Hawaii have experience of a seismic wake-up call, and they understand that they cannot just view this from the lens of science and technology. They have to view it within from a broader macro perspective, and how programs like this impact people's culture and people's beliefs. So I think that they're scientists, so I think they are incrementally just becoming more aware and learning how to contend with these kinds of situations. I think that they've made a good faith attempts to do that.
Hawaii Congressman Scott Psyche. When we come back, a Memorial Day tribute. The Luxembourg American Cemetery is the final resting place for more than 5,000 World War II soldiers who died serving their country on foreign soil. Sergeant John Mercer is one of them. He's the great uncle of Ivy Vaino. Ivy joins us today with her husband, Dr. Arnie Vaino. He wrote about visiting the grave in a column featured in News from Indian Country in 2013.
Sergeant John Mercer is my great uncle, my grandmother's brother. And I've always been interested in family connections and family history. And I knew about John, but my family didn't know, his siblings didn't even know what happened to him. They just knew that he died in the war. They didn't know where he was buried or anything like that. So I started searching and researching John, and to make a long story short, found him at Luxembourg American Military Cemetery, and I emailed them and let them know who I was, and then they sent back some information about his missions. They sent a picture of his grave site with his grave marker, and that was so powerful to receive some information about him that my family didn't even know. So then Arnie, my husband, had this great idea that we should take a trip out to Luxembourg. And that's what we did in 2013 to honor my great uncle and our family. And it was so powerful and so moving to be at the gravesite it just kind of sealed some unknowns for me and for my grandmother. He was a year older than my grandmother, and they came from a big family, 15 brothers. Their mother was Frances Beargrease Mercer, and you know, he came home for a couple of visits, and then in his uniform, and I have pictures of those gatherings and stuff, but then he was so young and then went off to war, and it just, you know, and then nothing. Then he passed on, and that's what they knew, and his body stayed in Luxembourg, was buried in Germany, and then transferred over to the cemetery, and then nothing. And so decades later, for me to find this information out for the family, and for us to go there, was, I can't even describe what that did for us and my family. And his brothers, a couple of his brothers were in this service, and Korea. My Uncle Mally was a Korean War veteran, and when we came back from the cemetery from that trip, I called Mally and I said, "Hey, Uncle Mally, we're back from the trip, and we got to stand at your brother's grave," and he was so thankful. Like, he was like, "We don't, you know, we would never be able to do this ourselves, to go pay tribute and give honor to my brother, but you were able to do this, you and Arnie, and we're so thankful that you could do that for us."
It was beautiful. Ivy had already been putting up a family flag at the Grand Portage at the Grand Portage powwow every year, and you know, as Native people, you know, everybody honors their veterans, and there's a veteran song when they come out, when the grand entry is, and just, you know, to know that he was so young, and he did give his life for his country, and you know, there's a Native people serve in the military at higher rates than the rest of the population, and you know, some of that is due to family traditions, you know, just traditions, warrior traditions, and you know, and the feeling that, you know, this is our land, and we honor it, and to be there and to be among 5,076 white crosses in all perfect alignment, and birds flying around, and it was a really peaceful scene, and to be able to see Ivy sitting by Johnny's grave was powerful in and of itself. And I had a recording of of Ivy's grandmother. I went to go visit her, and just recorded her on my phone, and she was talking to her brother, and you know, she's 95 now, she's still alive, but she was 89 at the time, and you know, talked to him and said, you know, most of my brothers are with you now, and you know, for her to be able to actually speak to him, and she spoke to him as if she was standing there with us, and it was powerful, and it was beautiful.
Thank you, Dr. Arnie Vainio and Ivy Vainio. The Grand Canyon has inspired creativity for generations. Musicians know this well through the Grand Canyon Music Festival. Since 1983, the festival has had a unique relationship with nearby tribes. The Native American Composers Apprenticeship Program brings Native youth together with professional classical musicians and composers. Michael Begay was an apprentice, and now he's a teacher.
I've been trying to chase music programs around for quite a while growing up. I moved around a lot due to my father's work, and it was very challenging trying to find a music composition program. And I've always been trying to get in on in a music program down in Phoenix when I was in high school there. But eventually I moved back to the reservation, and that's when I found NACAP with the Grand Canyon Music Festival, and I've just never left. I started writing compositions as a teenager, and I've worked with many Native American composers while I was growing up, including Brent Michael Davids, Jared Impachacha Tate, and Raven Chacon. They've all helped me when I was really young and starting out, and they let me drive around with them as an apprentice as well, driving around to schools. And I got to learn quite a lot of their pedagogy and all of their techniques and stuff. So it was very mind opening.
Let's take a listen to Michael's composition for string quartet. That was music by Michael Begay. For more news and updates, check out IndianCountryToday.com. Take time to remember those who have walked with us on this Memorial Day. Thanks for your love and sacrifice. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. From Indian Country Today, I'm Karina Dominguez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
Indian Country Today is produced at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
This is Indian Country Today.